He didn't ride into town to become a hero. But when he saw the three sisters chained and trembling on that platform, something in him broke. He raised his hand, bought them, and with that choice changed all four of their lives forever. The heat pressed down like a punishment, noon sun high and merciless. Flies gathered where the sweat ran and the stink of livestock was thick enough to choke on. But it wasn't the animals that made Marshal Holt McCree's stomach turn. It was the auction block, and the three girls standing on it, wrists shackled, eyes hollow. Not a man in the crowd looked at them like people. Not one. Holt had seen many things in his years: hanging trees, broken families, graves without names. But this was different. Maybe it was because they were children. Maybe it was the way the smallest one kept whispering to herself like she was somewhere else entirely. Or maybe it was because he'd come into town for fencing wire and molasses, not a reckoning. The auctioneer barked like a man selling cattle. Three sisters, strong, quiet, no disease package deal, who'll start me off. The crowd murmured. Coins clinked. A man in a red vest spit and shouted a bid. The sisters flinched. Holt's fingers curled into a fist around the telegram in his coat pocket. Bad news from home again, but it didn't matter anymore. He nudged his hat back and stepped forward. "I'll take 'em," he said, loud enough to stop the murmur. The auctioneer blinked. "You what?" "I said I'll take 'em, all three, whatever the price is." Gasps followed. Not because it hadn't been done before. Plenty of men bought girls at auctions. But because Holt McCree wasn't the type. Not since he put a bullet through a bounty hunter trying to drag a Cherokee boy back to Georgia. Not since he'd walked away from the job, the badge, the blood. The man in the red vest growled, "You gonna keep 'em or bury 'em, Marshal?" Holt didn't answer. He walked to the platform, pulled the coin pouch from his saddlebag and dropped it at the auctioneer's feet. "They come with me, now." The crowd didn't cheer or jeer. It just moved aside like water around a stone as Holt led the girls from the block. The oldest, maybe 15, kept her eyes straight ahead. The middle one, 12 at best, held the smallest's hand like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. None of them spoke. Not then. By the time they reached Holt's horse, the girls had begun to breathe again, though barely. He cut their shackles himself, tossed the iron into the dirt. "I'm Holt," he said, keeping his voice low. "You don't owe me your name or anything else. I've got a ranch west of here. It's quiet. If you want to come, I'll take you. If you don't, I'll give you coin enough to get somewhere else." The oldest looked at him then, straight in the eye. "You gonna hit us later?" she asked. "No." "You gonna sell us again when the food runs out?" "No." "You lie," the smallest girl whispered. "I don't," Holt said, "but you don't have to believe me yet." They rode in silence, the girls sharing the horse while Holt walked beside it. Dust rose behind them, thick as regret. By nightfall they reached an outcrop of rocks where Holt made camp. He cooked beans and cornbread, gave them the canteen, and offered blankets. Still no names. The next morning the youngest girl finally spoke. Her voice was a whisper wrapped in thorns. "My name's Mercy." The middle sister stirred the fire with a stick. "I'm Ruth." And the oldest, after a long pause, "Naomi." "Fitting," Holt murmured, more to himself than them. 3 days to the ranch. 3 days of silence, occasional questions, and slow uncoiling of terror. Holt learned small things. Ruth liked horses. Mercy had a stutter when nervous. Naomi didn't sleep much. Neither did he. On the second night they passed a creek where vultures circled. Holt didn't let them stop. Whatever was rotting nearby, he didn't want the girls to see it. But Naomi had seen worse. That much was clear. At the ranch, his old cattle dog barked once before recognizing the rhythm of Holt's boots. The house was plain but clean. 2 bedrooms, 1 barn, and a pasture where the fence still needed mending. Holt showed the girls inside. They didn't move. "You can take the bigger room," he said. "There's clean water out back. You'll be safe here." Mercy asked the question none of them wanted to say out loud. "How do we know?" You don't, Holt said, but I'll prove it, every day if I have to. That night they slept with the door locked from the inside. Holt didn't blame them. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap and the dog curled at his feet. Sleep didn't come. By the end of the week, Naomi began washing her own clothes. Ruth fed the hens. Mercy tried to milk the goat and got headbutted for her trouble. The laughter that followed was sharp and sudden. It startled even them. But peace is a fragile thing. Holt knew that too well, and it didn't last. One afternoon, a rider came. Dusty boots, clean coat, face too smooth to trust. He called himself Mr. Collard. Said he represented a buyer who'd seen the girls in town. They were marked property, Collard said, sipping from Holt's water like he owned the place. Your receipt don't mean much. We've got papers say they belong to the Hammond estate. They don't, Holt replied cold. Collard smiled. That ain't your call. The girls heard every word from the hallway. Holt didn't turn to look, but he knew Naomi was listening hardest. Her shoulders had stiffened. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were waiting for the lie she'd expected from day one. But Holt didn't lie. He stood slowly. You come back here again, he said to Collard, and you best bring more than a mouth. Collard laughed, but he left. The tension didn't. Naomi didn't speak that night. Neither did Holt. Ruth broke the silence at dawn. You'll fight for us. I already did, Holt said. But if they come back, I'll still fight. Mercy touched his arm then, just a brush of fingers. The first time she'd done so, he didn't move. Days passed, then a week. Collard didn't return, but others did. Men who watched from the ridge, men who left boot tracks near the barn. Holt started sleeping with the rifle beside the bed. Naomi took to carrying a kitchen knife in her boot. Then came the day the chicken coop door was found hanging open. All the hens gone. No prints but horse tracks. A message. Holt fixed the door, then dug new fence posts. When Naomi asked why he wasn't chasing them down, he looked her in the eye. Because I want them to think I'm soft, he said, right up until I show them I'm not. Naomi nodded. Her hand closed around the hilt of that kitchen knife. Later that night, Holt heard whispering from their room. Not fear, not panic, planning. And for the first time in a long, long while, he let himself believe this might not end in fire. It might end in something better. Something worth protecting. Something like family. It started with a snapped fence rail and a single set of prints, deep, deliberate, meant to be seen. Holt stared at the footprint in the morning frost and knew two things instantly. The rider hadn't come to steal, and he hadn't come alone. This was bait, but for who and for what he wasn't sure. Not yet. By the time Holt got back to the house, Naomi was already at the stove, her movements sharp, precise, every chop of the knife on the cutting board like a warning shot. Ruth swept near the hearth, though her eyes flicked constantly toward the windows. Mercy sat near the doorway, feet dangling, humming under her breath, but watching, always watching. Holt didn't have to speak. Naomi met his gaze and said flatly, "Someone was here again." "Yeah," Holt said, "and they wanted us to know." He poured himself a cup of coffee, thick and bitter, and sat at the table. The three girls waited, barely breathing. They'd only been there a few weeks, but it was enough time to learn Holt didn't waste words. If he was quiet, it meant something bad was coming. "They're testing the edge," he said at last, "looking to see what I'll tolerate." "You think they'll come back?" Ruth asked, though she already knew the answer. "They will," Holt said, "and when they do, I need to know you'll do exactly what I say. No questions, no hesitation." Naomi didn't blink. What if doing nothing is what gets us hurt? "Then I'll take the hurt for you," he said, and meant it. That silenced the room. The day passed in a slow crawl. Holt moved through it like a man setting traps, not literal ones, not yet, but quiet measures of defense. Reinforced hinges, fresh nails in the doorframe, a sawed-off tucked under the porch step. He taught Naomi how to check for disturbed brush. He showed Ruth how to tie a signal rope between the barn and the back shed. If someone crossed it, the knot would pull loose and the bell would fall. Mercy watched all of this with wide eyes. At one point she tugged Holt's sleeve. "Do we have to leave?" "No," he said gently, "but we might have to stay real quiet for a while." That night the wind didn't howl. It waited. The house creaked like an animal holding its breath. Holt sat near the fire, rifle across his lap, eyes never closing. Naomi stayed beside him, pretending to read but never turning the page. And then just before dawn, a sound. Not the door, not the window. The barn. Holt moved faster than thought. Out the back door, boots silent on the frozen ground. He slipped through the shadows until he reached the barn's edge. Inside, a whisper, a boot scuff. Then a voice, low, familiar. "Marshal McCree, you in there?" "Collard." Holt waited, heart steady, breath controlled. "You've got something that don't belong to you," Collard called, "and the law's got ways of correcting that." There was laughter then. 2, maybe 3 men, not just talk now, footsteps, boots crunching hay, hands dragging across wood. Then the thud of something falling. The hens, dead, piled like a warning. "You tell those girls the Hammond family doesn't forget what it paid for," Collard said. "They can either come quiet or come broken." Holt stepped out of the shadows. "You got one chance to walk away." Collard's face twisted into a grin. "That's supposed to scare me." "No," Holt said, "this is." He fired. Not at them, at the post above their heads. The bullet split the beam and sent a hornet's nest the size of a saddlebag crashing down into the hay. Collard screamed as the swarm rose, thick and furious. His men flailed, slapped, cursed, ran. One tripped over a feed bucket and landed hard. By the time Holt fired a second warning shot, they were gone. Back inside, Naomi was already unbarring the door. "Was it him?" she asked. Holt nodded. "And he'll be back." "What do we do now?" "We plan," he said grimly. The next few days passed in tight formation. Holt knew Collard wouldn't be humiliated twice without retaliation, and retaliation meant escalation. He didn't wait. He rode to town, slow and deliberate, coat open so the shotgun across his chest was plainly visible. The sheriff, a drunk named Earl Fenwick who'd been asleep under his desk more often than not, blinked when Holt kicked the door open. "You planning to do your damn job?" Holt asked. Earl rubbed his eyes. "That depends. What job is that?" Holt dropped a bloodied coil of rope on the man's desk. "This was nailed to my barn, with a name carved in the wood beside it." "Whose name?" "Naomi," Holt said coldly. Earl paled. "You think I can stop Collard?" "I think you can deputize me and get out of the way." That night, Holt rode back with a badge in his pocket he had no intention of using. What he needed was information and leverage. Naomi waited on the porch when he returned. She didn't ask what he'd found, just handed him a bowl of stew and sat beside him in silence. Finally, she said, "I won't let them take us, not again." "You won't have to," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he heard it, riders, in the distance. Not close yet, but closing. He stood stiff, bones aching from too many nights without sleep. Naomi followed. "Get the others inside," Holt said. "Bar the door." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." She hesitated just for a breath, then she nodded. Inside, Ruth was already gathering Mercy into her arms, whispering something low and calming. Holt moved quickly through the house, checking each blind, each escape route, each weapon. And then he opened the cellar door. "Go down," he said. "Stay quiet. Don't come out unless I call for you." Naomi shook her head. "I'm not hiding again." "This isn't hiding," he said. "It's surviving." Ruth touched Naomi's arm. "Please." And that did it. They went. Holt stood alone in the dark. No sound but the wind and his own breathing. He could feel it building in his chest, that cold calm he'd known in the war, the one that let you pull a trigger and sleep after. Then hooves. Not one rider, 5, 6. Collard at the front, grinning. "You gonna make this hard again, Marshal?" "I hope so," Holt said and lifted the shotgun. Behind Collard, one of the riders moved. A girl, no, a boy, barely older than Ruth. He looked terrified, forced into this, no doubt. Holt didn't aim at him. "You know this won't end well," Collard said. "For who?" Holt asked. That's when the first shot rang out, not from Holt, from the ridge. Collard's horse reared, screaming. He tumbled into the dirt, cursing. "Naomi!" Holt turned in time to see her on the ridge, rifle braced against a tree stump. Ruth and Mercy just behind her. The girls hadn't hidden. They circled around. Holt grinned for the first time in weeks. "Looks like you brought the wrong kind of fight," he said. Collard's men panicked. One tried to run. Another raised his gun and dropped it just as fast when Naomi fired again, into the dirt at his feet. "Go," Holt said. They went. All except Collard. He lay there, face twisted, clothes muddy, pride shattered. "You'll pay for this," he spat. Holt walked over and picked up the man's gun, snapped it clean in half against his knee. "I already did," he said. Naomi reached them, breath hard, eyes wild. She didn't speak, just stood beside Holt, rifle still warm in her hands. They didn't speak much after that, just stood there as the wind picked up and scattered the dust. But something had shifted. Not just safety, not just defense. Trust, and the knowledge that no matter what came next, they wouldn't face it alone. The days after the standoff bled together like watercolors on wet paper, soft around the edges but charged underneath, the calm before whatever storm would come next. Holt had lived long enough to know a man like Collard didn't ride away forever. Humiliation was a wound men like him couldn't tolerate, and Naomi's shot had cut deep. Holt checked the fence line every morning, the rifle never far, his eyes always scanning the tree line for riders who didn't belong. But even with that tension hanging in the air, life had started to take root in the quiet spaces Collard had failed to burn. Mercy had begun to hum again, not just under her breath but out loud now in the open. Simple songs, fragments of hymns, things she must have remembered from another life, a better one. Ruth spent her afternoons in the barn brushing Holt's old mare, a gentled creature named Sparrow, while Naomi had taken to sitting on the porch with a ledger she'd found tucked in one of Holt's cabinets, calculating grain storage and feed expenses like she was born for it. Holt didn't ask where she'd learned to read. He just listened when she spoke and made the changes she suggested, because she never said anything that wasn't worth listening to. They never called him father, never called him anything really except Holt. But there was a rhythm to their movements now, a closeness that wasn't born of fear. The house no longer echoed with silence. The floorboards creaked beneath running feet. The kitchen filled with the scent of cornbread and cinnamon bark Ruth had insisted on adding to the morning oats. When Holt rode out to mend the western fence, Naomi always packed him a lunch wrapped in oilcloth. When Mercy fell and scraped her knee, she didn't cry. She came to Holt, held out her leg and waited for him to fix it. The healing was slow, uneven, and tender in ways Holt didn't have words for, but it was happening, and that scared him more than anything else. Because happiness, real happiness, was fragile, it drew fire. It was the letter that broke the quiet, arrived in the mailbag, dust-covered and creased, with a return address from Texas and a seal Holt recognized. Not the name, but the stamp, twin hounds wrapped around a cross. The Hammond estate. He opened it in the barn, away from the girls, and read it standing in straw and silence. It was legal language, coded in civility but lined with threat. Collard had filed claim of theft. The girls, it said, were indentured by contract to the Hammond estate, and their release without consent constituted unlawful seizure. There would be legal recourse. Holt would be summoned. They'd turned it into paper, a whip dressed as a signature. That night he didn't speak of the letter, not yet. He fixed dinner like always, listened to Mercy sing as she braided Ruth's hair, and nodded when Naomi mentioned the rising cost of oats. But later, long after they'd gone to sleep, he sat at the table and stared at the letter again. He didn't know much law, enough to wear a badge once, enough to bend it when it needed bending. But this was different. It wasn't bullets anymore. It was ink, and ink could strangle quieter than rope. 2 nights later, Holt rode to town. He didn't say why. He left before the sun rose and returned after it fell, bringing back nothing but new fence wire and the smell of whiskey in his coat. He didn't drink, not anymore, but he'd gone into that saloon with a purpose. He'd sat across from Judge Wilmer Chase, a man who could barely keep his robes clean, and asked him straight, "If Collard brings this to court, will the girls be safe?" Judge Chase had laughed, not cruelly, just bitterly. "Safe," he'd echoed. "Holt, I've seen the way this town thinks. You might have scared off Collard's boots, but not his bank book. If he walks in with a stack of papers and says those girls belong to the Hammonds, there ain't a jury in the territory that'll side with them. Or you." "And you?" Holt had asked. "I'm not your enemy," the judge had said quietly, "but I ain't your sword either." Back home, Holt didn't tell the girls any of it. Not yet. But Naomi could smell truth like smoke. That night, when the others had gone to bed, she stood in the doorway to the porch and waited until Holt looked up from whittling. "You're planning something," she said. "I'm planning not to lose you," he answered. Her eyes, sharp and shadowed in the moonlight, didn't blink. "You already made that decision." "I thought I did," he said, "but now it's gonna cost more." Naomi sat beside him, pulled her knees up to her chest. "We were never free," she said after a long silence. "We just got lucky long enough to feel like it." "You're free now," Holt said, but the words felt hollow. She didn't answer, just stood and went back inside. The next morning, Mercy woke up with a fever. Not a little one. The kind that cooks from the inside out. Her skin hot to the touch, eyes glassy, breath fast and shallow. Holt lifted her from her bed and carried her to the kitchen, calling for Ruth to fetch cool cloths and Naomi to boil water. They worked in frantic silence, and Holt kept one hand on Mercy's back, feeling the heat like it might burn through his palm. They took turns through the night. Ruth prayed. Naomi read from the old ledger, whispering numbers like they were spells. Holt sat still and waited, the way a man waits for sunrise after too many nights of darkness. And when it came, Mercy opened her eyes. "I saw Mama," she whispered. Ruth froze. "What?" "She said it wasn't time yet, said you were doing okay." Mercy smiled, thin and far away. She had blue ribbons in her hair. Naomi closed her eyes. Her hands were trembling. Mercy fell asleep again, but she was breathing better now. The worst had passed. They didn't say anything about what she'd said. They didn't have to. Holt stepped outside and stared at the horizon until the sun had fully risen, burning the memory of Mercy's words into his bones. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the light fade, Naomi said, "I don't want to run again." "You won't," Holt said. "But if we don't run, we have to fight different." "What are you thinking?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "You told me once that being quiet was sometimes the smartest way to be heard." "I did. I've been thinking maybe we make people look at us different. So when Collard comes, he doesn't just see what he thinks we are." Holt turned. "And what are we?" She looked him dead in the eye. "A family, one they'll have to break themselves to destroy." For a long time Holt didn't say anything. Then he nodded, once, slow. The next day they dressed up, not to pretend, to declare. Holt shaved. Naomi tied her hair with a ribbon Mercy had tucked away in her drawer. Ruth wore the dress she'd sewn from old curtains and scrap lace. They rode into town like they belonged there. Because they did. They went to church, sat in the front row. Naomi held the hymnal. Ruth took communion. Mercy, still pale, clung to Holt's arm and whispered the prayers. They walked through the market afterward. People stared, but Holt stared back, daring them to question what their eyes refused to see, a rancher and his daughters, proud, defiant. Collard wasn't there that day. But word would reach him. And Holt knew what was coming. They were no longer ghosts. And ghosts are hardest to kill once they've found a name. The letter came 3 days after they walked into church. Holt found it folded beneath the latch on the barn door, not sealed, not signed, just tucked there like a viper waiting in silence. The paper was thick, clean, and printed. The kind of paper only powerful men used. The words were short, but the message was longer than ink could ever carry. You've made your stand, so have we, be ready. He didn't show the girls. Not yet. Not because he didn't trust them to understand, but because he knew what would rise in Naomi's eyes, what hard fury would follow. And Holt couldn't let her carry that weight until she had to. That morning passed in quiet routine. Mercy's fever had broken, and she sat wrapped in a quilt on the porch, drinking broth while watching the wind stir the dust. Ruth hung laundry on the line with her sleeves rolled and her mouth set, humming half of a song she likely didn't remember the name of. Naomi chopped firewood with the rhythm of a soldier, strike, pause, split. They knew even without the letter, they could feel it. What are we doing today? Naomi asked, not looking up from the axe handle. Reinforcing, Holt answered. Barn doors, cellar trap, perimeter lines. Naomi gave a single nod. How long do we have? Not long. She didn't ask how he knew. She just swung the axe again. It wasn't until late afternoon that the first real sign came. A cloud of dust, just to the west of the ridge, too big to be a gust, too small to be a herd. Ruth saw it first and called for Holt. He stepped out of the barn, wiped his hands on his jeans, and raised the spyglass from the porch shelf. 4 riders, not Collard, not yet. These were scouts sent to take measure, to test the pulse of the land. Men with lean faces and fast horses, the kind who didn't knock. They didn't approach directly, circled instead like wolves sizing up the fire. What do we do? Ruth asked, coming to stand beside him. We let them see what they came to see, Holt said. He didn't hide the rifle, didn't tell the girls to duck. Instead, he brought Mercy out in his arms, sat her in the chair with a blanket around her shoulders. Ruth returned to the wash line. Naomi went back to chopping wood. Let them see, we are not afraid. Let them carry that message back. By sundown, the riders had vanished, but they'd left footprints near the north fence, boots, not hooves. One had come closer, close enough to touch the land. Holt found a torn strip of cloth tied to a branch, red, not accidental. That night he lit 2 lamps and placed them in the front windows, not as beacons, as warnings. Inside, Naomi was sewing again, mending one of Ruth's torn sleeves. Ruth sat brushing Mercy's hair, careful and slow, humming again. Holt made coffee and set out dry bread, too nervous to eat, too proud to show it. The air had gone sharp, tense, a silence with teeth. Holt, Naomi said quietly, not looking up from her needle. You should tell us what you're not saying. He sat down heavily, looked at all 3 of them. They'll come before the week's out, maybe sooner. Mercy shrank into the blanket. Ruth reached for her hand. Naomi, steady as stone, asked, how many? Don't know yet, but it'll be more than just Collard. Ruth swallowed. And if they come with the sheriff, with papers? Then I give them a choice, Holt said. Same as I did before. They can turn around, or they can cross the line. Naomi set her needle down. And what if they cross it? Then we hold, he said simply. It wasn't enough. They all knew it, but it was honest. And right now, honesty mattered more than comfort. The next day was spent readying. The cellar was stocked, water, dried beans, blankets, the small pistol Naomi had hidden away wrapped in cloth. Ruth checked and rechecked the back windows for cracks in the shutters. Holt buried a second rifle under the trough, placed a lantern by the base of the windmill, and set a mirror atop the tool shed angled just right. They ate supper outside, all four, beneath the raw gold of a sky too beautiful for the danger it held. Naomi spoke then, voice low. "If they take us, we won't survive it again." "They won't," Holt said. "You can't promise that." "I don't have to, I just have to make it true." After dark, the wind shifted. It came from the south now, hot and dry, full of distant echoes. Holt knew that kind of wind, the kind that rose before blood spilled. At midnight, Ruth couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen peeling apples with a dull knife, each curl falling into the bowl like a ticking clock. Holt sat across from her. "I keep thinking about Mama," she said softly. "She used to say no storm lasts forever." Holt nodded. "She sounded like Naomi. She was quieter but strong. She'd be proud." Ruth wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I hope so." The following morning came brittle and clear, too still, too clean. By noon the dog began to growl low, constant. Naomi went to the porch, rifle in hand. Holt joined her, spyglass pressed to one eye. 6 riders this time, collared among them, not in front center, wrapped in dark cloth and new arrogance. Behind him 2 wagons covered. Holt's stomach sank. "You see it?" Naomi asked. "Yeah," Holt murmured. "They brought chains." The girls didn't run, didn't hide. Mercy helped carry water buckets to the porch. Ruth sat with her book open, hands steady. Naomi didn't blink. "They think if they come with ink and iron we'll just fold," Holt said. "They think fear is all we've got." "They forgot something," Naomi said. "What's that?" "We've got each other." Collard dismounted 10 paces from the porch. Holt stayed seated. Naomi stood behind him, rifle in both hands. "I warned you," Collard called. "Warned you real polite, this doesn't have to be hard." "You said that last time," Holt replied. "Still left with bees in your pants." Chuckles from the girls. Collard flushed but didn't rise to the bait. "I've got the papers this time," he said. "From the state, legal, signed." "Papers don't make people property," Holt said. "They do when the law says so." Naomi stepped forward. "The law changes. Sometimes all it takes is a fight." Collard's eyes narrowed. "You the one who shot at me." "I missed on purpose," she said. "I won't again." He motioned. 2 men stepped forward with the chains. "Don't," Holt said, rising. "They're coming with us, one way or another." "Then you best make peace first." There was silence. Collard stepped forward, and Holt shot the chain from the man's hand. The explosion was deafening. The man screamed, dropped the iron. Chaos erupted. Shots from the ridge. Ruth and Mercy had climbed the water tower, firing down with the old Winchester. Naomi's rifle cracked beside Holt's ear. Men scattered. Horses reared. Collard shouted, "Stop, stop." But it was too late. Naomi shot the second chain carrier in the leg. Ruth winged a man's hat clean off. Holt stepped into the yard, eyes blazing. "Drop every weapon," he roared, "or I swear to God I'll finish what we started." One by one, guns hit dirt. Even Collard. He was breathing hard now, face pale, hair matted with sweat. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered. "Sure I do," Holt said. "I made sure your kind doesn't win today." Naomi came down the steps. "You bring those wagons here again, you won't leave at all." Collard backed away. "You think this is the end. This is just the beginning." "No," Holt said. "It's not the beginning, it's the end of you." They left. And this time they didn't come back. Not that week, not the next. Word spread. A rancher, 3 girls, and a shotgun had done what the courts wouldn't. The town changed slowly. People still stared, but the stares began to carry something else. Not pity, not scorn. Respect. And one quiet Sunday, As they passed through the market, the pastor's wife reached out and touched Naomi's arm. "You're welcome here," she said. No one had to speak. That moment said enough. Back home, Holt took down the lanterns from the window, closed the cellar door for the first time in weeks, planted sweet corn near the fence. Mercy began drawing. Ruth asked for books. Naomi started writing down the stories of their days, as if knowing this kind of peace needed remembering. And in the dusk, as the four of them sat watching the sun bleed into the sky, Naomi turned to Holt and said, "We're not running anymore." "No," he agreed. "We're not surviving either." Holt looked at her, at the girls. "No," he said again. "We're living." The rains came late that spring. Not a hard deluge, but steady, like the land was drinking after too long parched. It turned the earth soft underfoot and painted the sky a muted silver for days on end. Mercy liked to press her palms to the windows and trace the drops as they slid down, whispering names to them like friends. Ruth built paper boats and floated them in the puddles by the barn. Naomi didn't say much, but Holt noticed she'd taken to writing more often, pages filling up with looping, purposeful strokes. And for the first time since the auction block, the girls smiled without waiting for something to take it away. But peace never stayed long on open ground. It was Sheriff Mathers who brought the first real tremor. He arrived unannounced late one afternoon, his bay horse slick with rain and his face drawn tighter than usual. Holt met him on the porch, arms crossed, eyes cautious. "Evening, Sheriff." Mathers tipped his hat but didn't dismount. "I came out personal so no one twist my words in town." "That's so. I've known you a long time, Holt. You were a lawman once. Know how things work." "Things," Holt said slowly, "have a funny way of changing meaning depending on who's talking." Mathers nodded, accepting the hit. "Fair enough. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble, but words come down from Abilene. Bigger hands than yours or mine are asking questions. About the girls. About everything. You buying them, keeping them here. The shootout. The Hammond estate's been quiet, but they've got reach. One of their lawyers is poking around the circuit judges. And you're telling me this because—" Mathers's mouth flattened into a line. "Because I believe in doing what's right. And because I think you got about 2 weeks, maybe less, before someone comes down with papers you can't ignore." "I've ignored worse." "I know, but these won't come with men you can scare off with a rifle. They'll come with pens and seals and rules made for other people, people who look like you." Inside the house, Mercy's laugh rang out clear and sudden, a bright sound like wind chimes in summer. Mathers blinked. "She's got a beautiful laugh," he said quietly. Holt didn't respond. Mathers reached into his coat, pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I shouldn't be giving you this," he muttered, "but I figured you ought to see it coming." He handed over the paper. Holt read it once, then again. It wasn't a warrant, not yet, but it was the whisper of one, a court date, a summons. If he didn't show, it'd become law, and law had a long arm, especially when greased with money and legacy. "They're gonna try and make it look clean," Mathers said. "Like they're just asking questions, like it's just procedure. But if I show up, they'll take the girls, for safekeeping while it's sorted." Holt folded the paper slowly. "That's not happening." Mathers adjusted his reins. "I didn't think it would be." He turned his horse, hesitated. "There's a lawyer in Junction. Name's Hollies. Black woman, sharp as a knife and meaner if crossed. If anyone can find a thread to pull, it's her." Holt nodded, appreciated. Mathers rode off without another word. That night Holt sat Naomi down, told her everything. Ruth and Mercy listened too, wide-eyed and silent. "So they want to take us," Ruth said quietly. "They'll say it's to protect you," Holt answered, "while they decide if I broke the law by giving you a home." "But we were being sold," Naomi said. "Like cattle, you stopped that." I know. Why don't they care about that? Holt's hands clenched into fists. Because the law wasn't made for you, or me, not really. Naomi leaned forward. Then we changed the law. Holt blinked. How? We don't hide, we go to Junction. We talk to this lawyer, we make noise. It's dangerous. So is silence. For the next 2 days they prepared. Naomi packed every document she could find, sales records from the ranch, her own notes, even the receipt Holt had been given at the auction. Ruth rewrote their story by hand 3 times, each copy neater than the last. Mercy drew pictures of the ranch, happy ones. Horses, sunflowers, birds flying over the fields. Holt tacked one to the barn wall next to the saddle rack. Then, with the wagon loaded and the horses hitched, they rode out. The road to Junction wasn't smooth. Spring rains had mudded it into a mess of deep ruts and hidden stones. Twice they had to stop and dig the wheels out. Once, they passed a man in a soaked black coat walking with a limp and a rifle slung over his back. He nodded to them, said nothing. It took 2 days to reach the edge of Junction. It was bigger than Holt remembered. More buildings, a new hotel, brick sidewalks in the square, but still the same feel beneath it all, dust and pride and the hum of gossip just waiting for something to latch onto. They found Holly's office above a general store. Small sign, clean windows. The woman who opened the door looked nothing like Holt expected. Younger, sharper. Thin spectacles perched on her nose, her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. "You're late," she said. Holt blinked. "We didn't make an appointment." "No, but I've been expecting someone foolish enough to try and fight the Hammonds." She stepped aside. "Come in." They did. Naomi told their story. Holt filled in the gaps. Ruth handed over the copies of their written statement. Holly's listened the entire time without interrupting once. When they were finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "You're in deep," she said, "but not drowned." "That a legal opinion?" Holt asked. She smirked. "It's an assessment. The good news is the girls were never officially indentured. The paperwork Collard had was forged. Sloppy, too, I can prove it." "Then why the summons?" "Because the Hammonds are old money, old power. They think law is something they rent, and most of the time they're right, but I don't rent." Naomi leaned forward. "Can we win?" "Yes, but it won't be easy." Holt exhaled. "What do we need to do?" "Stay in town, be visible, be loud. I'm filing a counterclaim, wrongful seizure, fraud, unlawful detainment. If we win, not only will they not get the girls back, they'll owe you damages. And that'll hurt them more than bullets ever could." They rented a room above a bakery. Naomi took the bed. Holt and Ruth shared the floor. Mercy curled in Holt's coat and slept by the window. The trial date came fast. The courtroom was full before they even arrived. People leaned in the aisles. Reporters scribbled. Collard sat 3 rows back, smug as a snake in silk. The Hammond lawyer wore polished boots and a constant smirk. Holly stood and laid it out with fire and steel. "These girls were being trafficked," she said, "sold like livestock in broad daylight. My client stopped it, not with violence but with action. And now, because power hates being embarrassed, they want to punish him." The Hammond lawyer called it emotional manipulation. He waved papers, claimed Holt had no legal guardianship, accused the girls of lying. Ruth cried. Mercy covered her ears. Naomi stood like stone. Then it was Holt's turn. He didn't read from anything, didn't quote law. "I used to wear a badge," he said. "Thought that meant something. But when I saw 3 children being sold, nobody else moved. No one stopped it. No lawman, no judge, just me." He turned, looked straight at the jury. "If that makes me a criminal, then maybe the law needs changing." The silence that followed was heavy, full. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Then they came back. Verdict: Holt Kerrigan not guilty. Claim, girls released into his care permanently. Damages awarded. Outside the courthouse, people waited, applauded. A woman handed Naomi a red ribbon. A man gave Mercy a carved wooden doll. Collard vanished. Holly shook Holt's hand. "You did good," she said, "real good." He looked at Naomi, Ruth, Mercy. "No," he said, "we all did." They rode back to the ranch slow. No hurry, no shadows at their heels. Naomi leaned against the side of the wagon, eyes closed. "We didn't just survive," she murmured. "We changed something." Ruth smiled. "We planted something." Mercy whispered, "We're free." Holt didn't speak. He just drove the wagon home. The Hammond name did not die quietly. The jury's ruling cracked their image, but it didn't shatter it. In towns like Junction, power didn't bleed. It seeped, leaked into corners and papers, into banks and whispers. And just because the law had ruled didn't mean the world bowed to it. Back at the ranch, things felt lighter. For a while, Naomi rode into town without bracing herself. Ruth walked through the market square with her head high. Mercy, ever watchful, now giggled louder, drawing with chalk in front of the bakery every Saturday, confident now that the world couldn't just take her again. But Holt knew better than to trust the calm. The first letter was folded into a newspaper. No return name, no signature, just a sheet of torn stationery slipped between stories about cattle sales and late rains. On it, a line drawn in thick ink. "Win in court all you like, the land remembers." He burned it in the stove, but he didn't sleep well that night, and the next morning he walked the fence line twice, checked the cellar locks, found a bird nailed to the barn wall, a raven, its wings spread like a dark warning. He didn't tell the girls, not yet. Ruth had just begun teaching Mercy how to read, stringing together letters with patience only a sister could manage. Naomi was sewing again, but not for necessity. She started making dresses, real ones, pretty fabric, a bit of lace, lines that curved with pride. She made one for Ruth first, then Mercy. Then Holt caught her sketching another by lamplight. When he asked who it was for, she looked up, smiled crookedly, and said, "Haven't decided, maybe just because I can." But Holt started sleeping with the rifle closer now, and the dog stayed on the porch at night, ears perked. They came during the fifth night. No torches, no gunfire, just two figures on foot creeping through the orchard with blades and cloth sacks. Holt caught them before they made it past the chicken coop. Didn't shoot, didn't shout, just stepped out from the shadow with the rifle raised and a voice that could have split the moon. "Put 'em down." One ran, the other froze, young, no older than Naomi, pale, sweat on his lip. "Who sent you?" "And no one," he stammered. We thought." "You thought you could scare a man who's already stared down a courtroom and won." The boy's mouth worked, but no words came. Holt lowered the gun but didn't relax. "Walk fast, don't stop until sun's up." The boy ran like the devil had bitten his heel. Next morning, Naomi found the broken coop door. Ruth spotted the footprints. Holt didn't lie, but he didn't explain more than he had to. Naomi said nothing until sundown. Then, as she stood with him near the pasture, she said, "You think Hammond's paying folks to rattle us?" "Maybe, or maybe some folks just don't like what we proved in court. That black girls aren't property." Holt looked over at her. "That one man with the right kind of spine can burn a house of lies to the ground." Naomi stared off at the hills. "Then let them come. I'm done hiding from ghosts." But ghosts didn't always show themselves in the flesh. Sometimes they came in the form of silence. The bank sent a notice. Their loan had been bought out by a private investor. The new terms were harsh. Interest up, payment window shortened. Ruth read it 3 times, her brow creased. "They're trying to break us the quiet way," she said. "Wouldn't be the first time," Holt muttered. They didn't have the money, not for the new rate, not unless they sold livestock, tools, maybe even the spare mule. It would strip them thin. Make next winter hard. I could ride to Holly's, Naomi offered. She already did enough, Holt said. This is our storm now. Ruth looked between them. What about the winnings from the damages? Held up in appeal, Holt said bitterly. Another trick, delay and starve. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Mercy crept into Holt's room holding her chalkboard slate. She'd written one word. Leave. He knelt, took her small hands. No, baby, we don't run. She looked uncertain, but she nodded. A week passed. The bank sent another notice. Then the well dried up. At first it was just a trickle, then nothing. Holt lowered the bucket twice, bone dry. He paced the orchard, then followed the stream that fed the line. Found the blockage a mile north, a pile of debris stuffed into the narrow choke braced by boards. It had been done deliberately. Too clean, too sudden. He pulled it loose with a crowbar and watched the water surge back. But the message had been clear. Naomi rode to the neighbors, asked about tools and odd jobs. One of them, a woman named Inez, gave her a warm smile and a bag of flour without asking why. Others weren't so kind. I heard you folks stirred up trouble in Junction, one man sneered. Naomi stood tall. You mean we stood up? Same thing, far as the Hammonds are concerned. I'm not scared of their name. You should be. Holt went into town and found that prices had mysteriously jumped. Hay that used to cost $1 now ran $3. Nails were sold out. Feed was on backorder. At the blacksmith's, his order had been misplaced. He rode back through side roads, jaw tight, dust thick on his coat. The girls were waiting on the porch, Naomi with her arms crossed, Ruth with worry in her eyes. Mercy sat with the chalkboard again. This time she'd written. We mad? Holt sighed. No, baby, we just real tired of people trying to push us down. That night, Naomi said what they'd all been thinking. We need help. I know. Inez might give us names, people who aren't afraid. I'll ask. And so they began to gather, quietly, patiently. The next Sunday, Naomi hosted 3 families for supper, all black, all landowners. One man had lost his cattle after a series of accidental gate openings. Another had been denied service at the feed store. We all been bleeding, he said, just been doing it alone. Not anymore, Naomi said. By the next week, 8 families had joined their little circle. They pooled supplies, took turns escorting wagons to market, swapped stories, offered hands. One woman, Miss Esther, spoke softly but with fire. They want to starve us, but every field we plant is rebellion. Every meal we share is a slap in their face. That winter, they planted late lettuce and winter peas under makeshift covers. Ruth kept the books. Naomi helped teach reading to the younger children, and Mercy drew little maps of the farm network. Who had eggs, who needed nails, who offered kindling. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. But it was revolution. And then the fire came. It started in the barn. Naomi saw the glow through the back window and screamed. Holt was already moving. Flames roared high into the night, hungry and merciless. The horses were screaming. Ruth ran to unbolt the pen. Holt grabbed water buckets, but it was hopeless. The blaze had caught fast like it had been fed. They got the animals out, but the roof collapsed. And with it, most of their winter feed. Neighbors came at dawn. Inez brought bread. Miss Esther brought a prayer and a hard look. This wasn't random, she said. Somebody said it. Naomi knelt in the ash. Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't. We rebuild, she whispered. We do, Holt said. But later, alone in the orchard, he found another note, burnt around the edges. Next time it'll be the house. He stood there for a long while, the ash drifting around his boots. And then he rode into town. Not to the sheriff, not to the mayor, to the newspaper. He placed an ad, a simple one. A man once broke the law to save 3 girls. Now the law turns its face while they burn his barn. You watching, because we are. He paid double to have it run for 2 weeks straight. The next day Holly sent a letter. She'd seen the ad, she was coming. Not just her, journalists, watchdogs, reformers. The quiet war was about to get real loud. But the house still had to stand through the storm. So Holt set to work rebuilding the barn by hand. Naomi helped drive the nails. Ruth found old feed barrels no one was using. Mercy drew a picture of the fire, then another of the barn standing tall again. That night Holt looked at it. "Why'd you draw this one?" he asked, pointing to the second picture. Mercy smiled. "Because it's next." The barn rose slower this time, but stronger. New beams, treated wood and metal siding salvaged from a neighbor who'd overbought last spring. Holt didn't sleep much anymore. The nightmares weren't of courtrooms or fire, they were of silence. Of coming around the corner and finding the house gone, Naomi's books scattered in the wind, Mercy's chalk broken in the dirt, Ruth's braid ribbon burned to ash. But the quiet held for a time. Holly's arrived on a Wednesday, dismounting from a lean, dust-covered mare, boots sharp, hat low, the brim hiding the look in her eyes. Holt hadn't seen her since Junction, but the handshake she gave him was still made of iron. She wore a navy coat, fine but frayed at the edges, like everything she owned had been fought for. "I heard," she said, eyes scanning the frame of the half-built barn, the soot still clinging to the ground around it. "Every bit of it. And I'm not the only one listening anymore." Behind her came a second rider, a younger man, no more than 25, spectacles fogged with sweat and dust. He introduced himself as Samuel Choi, a reporter from Denver. "I write for the Lantern," he said, shaking Holt's hand with nervous enthusiasm. "Your story's making rounds back east. Holly said there was more to tell." Holt didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the horizon, to the tree line that still bore scorch marks on its edges. "There's always more," he muttered. Holly's met with Naomi that afternoon. Ruth listened in, notebook in hand. Mercy drew their visitors on the porch, careful, soft strokes. Holt stayed back, watching the clouds roll in. "They're not trying to win anymore," Holly said, once Naomi had caught her up. "They're trying to exhaust you. They want you tired enough to hand over everything just so it stops." Naomi's jaw set like stone. "Then we don't stop either." That night Choi sat at the dinner table and listened as Ruth, Naomi, and Holt told their story again, slower this time with more edges showing. He scribbled notes by candlelight. When Mercy fell asleep on Holt's lap, he set his pen down and watched her, eyes softening behind the lenses. "They thought this was just about land," Choi said. "But this is about dignity, about who's allowed to be free and who has to ask for it." Holt's voice was quiet but steady. "We don't ask anymore." By morning, Choi was gone, back to Denver, to editors, to typesetters. Holly stayed. She helped Ruth draft letters, to senators, newspapers, even churches. She helped Naomi write a public statement, one that was printed in the Junction Post and posted on the church doors downtown. "We are not thieves. We are not runaways. We are not someone's memory of slavery. We are present, living, building. We are free, not because someone said we could be, but because we made ourselves so." The next day, someone shot through their front window. No one was hurt. The bullet lodged in the floor near the hearth. Holt found the casing in the orchard grass, wrapped in a strip of newspaper, another message. He stayed up that night, sitting by the window with a rifle across his lap. Naomi joined him after midnight, 2 mugs of bitter coffee in her hands. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. At dawn, Mercy came out and sat at Holt's feet, wrapped in the blanket Naomi had sewn last spring. She pointed at the window and whispered, "Scared?" Holt bent down, kissed the top of her head. "No, baby, not while you're here." The next week passed in a blur. Choi's article hit the East Coast hard. Reprints came by mail from Boston, Baltimore, even Philadelphia. People started sending money, letters, offers. A preacher from Missouri rode 4 days just to shake Holt's hand. A white widow in New York sent enough to rebuild the barn twice over with a note that read simply, "My husband owned people. I never could repay that debt, but I hope this helps." Not all of it was praise. A brick came through the schoolhouse window one afternoon, narrowly missing Naomi. A note followed. "This ain't your land, never was, leave." But they didn't. They taught, they planted, they rebuilt. And one night, with lightning crawling across the sky and thunder shaking the rafters, Naomi stood on the porch with Ruth and Mercy beside her and Holt just behind. "They'll keep coming," Naomi said. "Yes," Holt agreed. "We don't run." "No, we don't." And then came the Hammond boy. His name was Elijah, 17, rail-thin and quiet-eyed. He came riding up on a mule that looked half dead and asked to speak to Naomi. Holt stood like a shadow beside the door, rifle close. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Elijah said. "Then why are you here?" Naomi asked. Elijah hesitated. "Because I read the article, the one Mr. Choi wrote. I know what my father did. I know what this family's done for generations, and I don't want it." "Want what?" Ruth asked, stepping beside her sister. Elijah looked at them like someone staring at light for the first time. "Power without decency," he said. "Money that costs souls." They let him sleep in the hayloft that night. Holt didn't trust him, but he didn't send him away either. Over the next few days, Elijah worked hard, fixed fence posts, chopped firewood, brought news from town. "They're stirring something big," he warned one morning. "My father's angry, not just at you, at me, says I'm no son of his." "Are you?" Holt asked bluntly. Elijah's mouth quivered, but he didn't flinch. Not anymore. And then came the rider. A pale man in a long oilskin coat, eyes like shale, hat pulled low, no name, just a note. A court order. Hammond had filed again, this time under new terms, claiming the property was a site of sedition, that the girls were being radicalized, that Holt was a danger to the community. "Judges don't sign these lightly," Hollis muttered, scanning the paper. "This is more than a nuisance. This is war." "When do they come?" Naomi asked. 2 days, maybe 3. "What do we do?" Hollis looked up slowly. "We prepare." They built barricades, not to keep people out but to slow them down. Neighbors arrived by the dozen, black and white, hands calloused, hearts steady. Tools were shared, meals prepared in bulk, watches set at night. By morning, Holt saw something he'd never thought he'd see again. A community built on resistance. People who once whispered in fear now sang hymns loud. Women who once averted their eyes now looked every visitor square in the face. Ruth and Naomi took turns teaching lessons under the oak tree, with more children coming each day. Elijah passed Holt a rough drawing he'd made. The ranch, the barn, the girls all in it, standing tall. "You're a good artist," Holt said, surprised. Elijah shrugged. "Ma taught me before she died." "She'd be proud," Holt muttered. And then came the morning of the hearing. Junction again, but this time not just 4 souls on a wagon. 20 riders, a caravan of witnesses, black farmers, white teachers, old veterans, young mothers. Choi met them on the courthouse steps, notebook in hand, eyes gleaming. Inside, the gallery overflowed. Naomi spoke first, clear, unshaken. "My sisters were bought like animals, but we are not beasts. We are builders, learners, citizens. We belong." Ruth spoke next. Her voice shook, but her words didn't. "I was afraid every day, until now." And then Holt. He stood tall, voice low. "This land doesn't belong to the Hammonds. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those who earn it with love." Hollis delivered the final blow, a copy of the threats, the sabotage. witnesses testifying to Hammond bribes and intimidation. The judge, a white man with a lined face, looked over the evidence for a long time. Then he stood. "I see no crime in what's been done here, only courage. This court will not be used to enforce legacy at the cost of justice." He slammed the gavel. Case dismissed, indefinitely. Outside, the crowd erupted. Naomi hugged Holt so hard he nearly dropped his hat. Mercy climbed the courthouse steps and drew a chalk heart on the wall. Ruth sang a hymn in a soft, trembling voice. And Elijah. He shook his father's hand as he passed him in the square. "You lost something real," he whispered. "Hope it was worth it." The ranch was never the same. Because it was more. More than safety, more than refuge. It was home. And it was only just beginning. The ranch was quieter after the verdict, but not still. Chores resumed, the barn stood solid again, and Naomi's school under the oak tree filled with children from nearby homesteads. Letters came in from across the country, support, thanks, and sometimes money tucked inside with notes like, "You reminded us what freedom looks like." Elijah stayed. Ruth braided rope with him and taught him how to cook. Naomi taught him to write his name clearly. One morning, Mercy asked if he was her brother now. "Only if you want me to be," he said. She nodded once like she was signing a treaty. But it wasn't over. Hammond's death came by whisper, shot in his parlor, no suspects. Naomi folded the newspaper and fed it to the fire without a word. Elijah said nothing either, just watched the field sway and murmured, "Sometimes evil ends without applause. It just stops breathing." Threats lingered, watchful riders, glass in the brush catching sun like flint, but none of it stuck. The community had grown teeth, a new kind of protection. People who once feared now brought tools, bread, help. Fall swept in with color. Naomi proposed a gathering, a celebration of everyone who stayed. Lanterns hung in trees, Naomi's pies were lopsided but warm, Ruth's stew disappeared fast. Holt didn't say much, but he stood near the edge of the orchard and watched them, dancing, laughing, surviving. Naomi gave a short speech. "We were bought like cattle, but we made something sacred out of our pain. This place stands because we do." That night Mercy left a drawing on Holt's bed. The house, the barn, the family, all of them holding hands. Below it, 2 words in chalk. "We stayed." Naomi sat beside Holt on the porch, the first snow falling quiet around them. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Naomi didn't flinch, "Then let 'em." And Holt smiled, for the first time in a long, long while, as the wind moved through the orchard like music.